Welcome to Futures Talks. This interview is brought to you by Imagine, the Institute of Future Studies at Iqra University, and COMSTECH, Organization of Islamic Cooperation Standing Committee on Scientific and Technological Cooperation. We are very happy today to present an illustrious scientist belonging to the OIC member state. Professor Dr. Ahmed Abdullah Azad is a leading and distinguished professor and researcher. After retiring in 2007, Professor Dr. Azad has given his time pro bono to developing research capacity in molecular biosciences in Bangladesh through the following honorary positions. TWAS Research Professor at BRAC University, TWAS Research Professor at Dhaka University, Incepta Visiting Professor at Dhaka University, Incepta Distinguished Professor at Bangladesh University of Health Sciences. Since 2007, Professor Azad has helped organize 4 international biotechnology conferences in Bangladesh and the 19th conference of the IAS in Dhaka in 2013. He is a founding member of Global Network of Bangladeshi Biotechnologists and chairs the Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security in Bangladesh. Professor Azad has made numerous contributions to the study of biochemistry. Today, we are going to explore his journey, his achievements, and the application of his works on the fulfillment of OIC goals. Thank you, Professor, for talking to us today and sharing your journey with us. I will begin with the same question that everybody wants to know about the scientist, the leading scientist of OIC member states, to tell us about your journey. What was it like growing up, and where did you get your education from, your family life? We would really appreciate that, sir.
Okay, science came much later. I mean, I grew up mostly in army cantonments and military establishments because my father was in the Army Education Corps. So I had my initial education in Quetta, in Pakistan. Studied at St. Francis Grammar School and Cantonment Modern School. And then we moved to Kakul, and I studied in Ahmedabad in a famous school called Burn Hall. And before that, I was in the Cantonment School. And towards the end of my secondary education, my father returned to what is now Bangladesh. At that time was East Pakistan, to the first cadet college there. And I came with him, and my studies continued at St. Placid's Grammar School in Chittagong. And then from there on, I went to Notre Dame College in Dhaka and then Dhaka University. From Dhaka University, I went on a Commonwealth scholarship to University of Toronto. And since my wife was also finishing her PhD, at the time I stayed for a couple more years after my PhD to do a postdoc on the National Medical Research Council fellowship. And then I went to Australia, to the Australian National University, one of the first non-white people to get a university position there. And I was at the Australian National University for about 5 years, and then moved to the Commonwealth Centre for Commonwealth Industrial and Scientific Research in the Industrial Organization, which is equivalent to PCSIR in Pakistan. And there I was there till 1999. And I was then invited to take on a position at the University of Cape Town as head of research, equivalent to Pro Vice Chancellor Research, University of Cape Town in South Africa. And because of my stay in South Africa, I had a huge opportunity to move around in the sub-Saharan Africa and have a first look at the third world conditions and how research can be done there. And that was a turning point. So I actually gave up my actual bench research and decided when I came back from South Africa to devote my time to building research capacity in developing countries. Whether or not it has been a good move, I can't say, because there have been very little success, but at least I've started people thinking about things, and things are moving along. And along the way, I've also had a lot of interactions with Pakistani friends and scientists, especially at the ICCBS and also at COMSTECH. And I've been to Pakistan a number of times in the recent past, and I enjoy being there. I've got very good friends, and we'll see how it continues, because I'm what do you call a faculty member also at the ICCBS in the what's the biological section there. So let's see. We can continue from there. When you want to talk about research, I will.
Thank you for sharing your journey, sir. And we would also like to know, how did you get into science? Because it seems that today we need more students to get interested in it. And how did you get evolve your interest in science? Was it something which you picked up from the childhood, from your early education?
Yes, I was very interested in science from early childhood, but I was more interested in being a pilot in the Air Force. So that was my whole goal. But unfortunately, it turned out that I didn't have the right eyesight. And then my mother and my father didn't want me to join the Air Force. They wanted me to study medicine. So I came to a compromise that I will not study medicine, but I will go into biological sciences. So they agreed, because they thought I had a better chance of living if I worked in university and did research rather than flying planes. So that's how I ended up. But when I had the opportunity to think about what area of science I want to get in, I had no problem, because Dhaka University had one of the first graduate programs in biochemistry in whole of South Asia, ahead of Calcutta University, and even Karachi. We started earlier than everybody else. So I had no qualms about joining the Department of Biochemistry. So I was the second honors batch in the Department of Biochemistry, which is now known as Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology. And I've not regretted a day of doing science. I've had lots of frustrations, especially trying to get things moving in our part of the world. But I think that this has given me an opportunity to give back, because time comes in life where you have nothing to prove, but you have the opportunity to help your younger colleagues. So that's why I'm in science at the moment. I'm not doing bench research anymore, but I'm not really true, but mostly advising people, younger people, helping them to get grants and helping writing up research proposals and continuing the networks I have built up all over the world through my membership of, I'm the Secretary General of the Islamic World Academy of Sciences, and I'm a fellow of 5 different science academies. So I get to see and move with a lot of people all over the third world, or not third world called anymore, the developing world. And that's very interesting. And because I worked for almost 19 years in a government organization, I really look forward to the opportunity to work with young students again when I went to Cape Town. And since I retired from paid work, I have worked pro bono with a large number of organizations, both in Bangladesh and elsewhere in the developing world.
And you have been almost all over the world. You have been. I mean, you from Pakistan to Bangladesh to South Africa and Australia. And when you were talking about your journey, you said that while working in South Africa, you thought of working for the developing countries. What was that experience like? What motivated you to change your focus?
Well, I was working in the HIV/AIDS area and was one of the foremost researchers in the field in Australia. But I found that to take my research forward, I would have to go to where the actual infections were, because there were very few infected people here in Australia, whereas it was a raging epidemic in South Africa and the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. So when I was headhunted for the job, I took it up thinking that I will be doing research. But what happened was that when I went there, I found that to do the research I was doing in Australia, I would need to really build up the capacity. Even though South Africa is a very advanced country in the African continent compared to the advanced countries I had worked in Canada and Australia, it was still lagging behind. And to do the sort of research I wanted to do, we had to build up the research capacity. So I helped to build up the largest biomedical research institute in the African continent. Is the Institute of Infectious Disease and Molecular Medicine in Cape Town. And because I was also advisory board member of the International Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology, which has 52 different member countries, including Pakistan and Bangladesh. I also then had the opportunity to help research capacity development in different countries, including Pakistan. And through these interactions, I helped to set up the third component of the ICGB, the International Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology in Cape Town. The previous two were in Trieste, where the headquarters is. The second one was in New Delhi, and the third one was in Cape Town. And besides these institutes, I was also appointed as the research coordinator for an organization called Eushapia, which was a network of 8 different English-speaking universities in sub-Saharan Africa, different countries, 6 different countries. And while I was there, we had a system where we were one of the first people to establish this program where the staff at universities in Africa would do their research both in their countries of origin and in University of Cape Town or any other university, and they could get their PhD from either place. And they were guaranteed that when they went back to their country, they would get 2 years of funding and help to set up a research lab. And I'm glad to say that while we were there, out of the 65 or so people we trained for PhD, not a single one left South Africa, not a single one left the African continent. So that was a way of trying to stop this brain drain and have brain retention. And I think it's worked very well, and a lot of other people have not followed the program. And during working for Eushapia also gave me a chance to travel in sub-Saharan Africa and see with my own eyes how difficult it was to do research in those countries. They were mostly involved in clinical trials and not very ethical, because the drug companies use people in these countries as guinea pigs, and very difficult. And we tried to create conditions where there was much more equity, and the people who were involved in clinical trials were also in perpetuity allowed to get the drugs that were developed with their help. And the other program I was involved with is the CAPRISA, which is a network of all the research activities in Africa, in South Africa and other countries of Africa in HIV/AIDS and TB. And I was one of the two scientific advisors who started with that organization. And that showed me an opportunity of how important clinical research was and public health research was, besides my own university in Cape Town, where I was research director. So I had an opportunity. So when the time came to come back to Australia, I decided that I had done enough for the developed countries, and I should now try and help the developing countries as much as I could. So that's where I've been for the last 15 years almost. Trying to help. I don't know how much I have been able to help, but I took it on as a way to give back what my country had given to me. Because in our countries, we get a free education. And once we pass out and get the education, we go overseas and very few of us return. So we have to create conditions in our own countries which enable young people to do world-class research in their own countries. And that's what my motivation is.
Thank you, Professor Azad, for such a comprehensive answer. And it brings us to our second segment, which is about your achievements and the projects that you have done. Professor Dr. Azad's first major research project at CSIRO, or the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization, involved the cloning and sequencing of the influenza virus neuraminidase, which allowed its 3D structure to be solved and led to the development of a structure-based and rationally designed drug, Relenza, that inhibits all strains of influenza and influenza A and B viruses. The second major research project at SIRO was to characterize, clone, and sequence the two genomic segments of double-stranded RNA of infectious bursal disease virus called IBDV and identify the host protective immunogen. This led to the production and commercialization of a very successful recombinant subunit vaccine against IBDV, for which Professor Dr. Azad was awarded the highly prestigious Chairman's Gold Medal and Prize for Exceptional Achievement. In recognition of his contribution to research and research management, Professor Dr. Azad has been elected a fellow of 5 different national and international science academies, which include the World Academy of Sciences, Islamic World Academy of Sciences, Bangladesh Academy of Sciences, Academy of Science of South Africa, Royal Society of South Africa. He was elected Secretary General of Institute of Advanced Study in 2017. He has held many honorary professorships and advisory positions in Bangladesh, India, and South Africa. Professor Dr. Azad, you have numerous achievements and contributions. We would like to know, what are the challenges that you have faced and how did you overcome those?
Okay, let me start a bit earlier than the CSIRO. That was after I had finished my PhD and my postdoc. I actually started my research in Bangladesh. And it was East Pakistan at that time in the Department of Biochemistry. And for that research, I isolated and identified a factor from a plant called Herbacea punctulata or Punarnava, and that was cytosine L-arabinopyranoside, which was very, very effective against gout. So that's where my interest in natural products chemistry comes from. And at the end of my research career, that's what I'm trying to get back into. So that research opened my eyes to the nucleic acids because I was working with a nucleoside, And right before that, the DNA structure has been solved, and they had found the genetic code and all those things, that wonderful things in molecular biology. So it was a completely new field, and I was looking to go and do research in that sort of an area. So after 2 years of working after my master's program in Cholera Research Lab, which is now known as the ICTBRB, one of the world's foremost research institutes in infectious disease research. I then went to University of Toronto for a PhD, where my professor, who was my supervisor, Byron Lane, had discovered a new RNA called 5.8S RNA, because previously what was known about ribosomes, there was a new RNA now, and I wanted to go and work on that RNA. And while working on that RNA, I used another RNA, which was known from before, and found that there's interaction between one of the RNAs in one subunit and another RNA in another subunit was responsible for joining the two subunits together. So that was very exhilarating research. But then what happens is that I continued that research when I went to the Australian National University. But then comes a time where people say that, all right, this is very blue sky research and you've got good publications and it's very exciting, but do something useful. But so useful, they mean that it must be applied. So that's why I joined the CSIRO. And in the CSIRO, as you said, my first project was to work on the influenza virus. And we are the first lab in the world to isolate the RNA for the neuraminidase, which is one of the proteins on the surface of the flu virus, and clone and sequence it. And that allowed the 3D structure of the molecule to be solved, because they wanted to know the sequence to combine with the 3D structural data. And that research led to the development of the first rationally designed structure-based molecule drug in the world. That was the first one, and others followed very quickly, and now there are lots and lots of them. And after this research, I worked on other viruses, so I became a molecular virologist. So I was working on viruses, but mostly in the molecular side. Worked on a number of viruses, and then I had a request to work on a new virus that had been new in the sense that nothing was known about its genomic structure, its genetic structure, or how the different proteins are produced. So it was very exciting work in the sense that we were able to find out what the two segments of this RNA, of this virus, RNA segments of this virus coded for which proteins. We identified proteins and then went on to identify the protein that protects the host from infection, and then went on to produce one of probably the first subunit vaccine, recombinant subunit vaccine in the world, which was very successful, and for which my group, I and my group were well recognized. And then this work led me to work on HIV/AIDS, because that was the raging problem at the time. And while everybody worked on the very important proteins, people thought, I started working on these accessory proteins of the virus, and worked out their genomic structure, and found that there were two proteins in HIV which were responsible for killing the host cells and causing immunodeficiency. And we developed conditions where we can arrest the progression to full-blown AIDS. And that research was also very well recognized, except that the research didn't lead to a product, because the companies which had already produced other antiviral products would not want to produce the ones we have. But I still think that this would have been a much better approach, but never mind. That's how life is. Because when you get to a stage where you need a collaboration from companies, the companies will look at the profit first before they look at anything else. Science is secondary, as you can see in the case of COVID. Anyway, so that's how I got into the research. And then, as I said before, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Cape Town approached me to take up a job. They were going to create a new job as head of research in the medical school. And that's why I went there. I thought that I would have the time to do research, but I was waylaid. And in a way, it was sad because I was at the pinnacle of my research career and I had to set that aside to help research capacity development. But I don't regret it because that has opened up other avenues. I mean, it has, in terms of money, it has been a great loss because I purposely didn't want to take on a paid job which would keep me confined to Australia, to Canada, or Western world. And I wanted the freedom to work in developing countries. So those are my achievements. As I said before, I helped to set up a number of institutes, one in Australia, two in South Africa, number of networks. And network building has been my passion, working with young students. And that's what I hope to do also with the ICCBS when we are allowed to travel again.
So, sir, what your experiences and the problems that you have faced tell me that the pharmaceutical companies, they are not as much interested in doing sciences or encouraging sciences and taking the products and bringing it to the market. They think about their bottom line first. So what is a strategy that you think of where these scientific projects can be turned into a product, not by the main pharmaceutical companies, maybe some other agency that we can create ourselves as a OIC cooperation?
Yeah, let me just not correct you, just say a few things about this, what should I say, partnership between universities and pharmaceutical companies. I'm not talking of the developed world because they already have that system going very well. In America, for example, which spends double whatever any other country spends on research, half of it comes from pharmaceutical companies. So there's a lot of joint positions between research centers and pharmaceutical companies, and there's no barrier to that. They do look at the bottom line. They always want to make a profit, but they also help research. But the problem is in our part of the world. A lot of people think that it's our companies which are like that. I don't think it's true. I think the researchers are more responsible, because I don't know about Pakistan, and I think it's not very different from what I found in Bangladesh, is that the researchers in the universities, especially in the top universities, look down upon the people who work in the pharmaceutical companies, because they think that if they were the best student, they would have become university teachers rather than going to a pharmaceutical company. But the problem with that is that the pharmaceutical companies, there are at least 5 or 6 in Bangladesh, and I'm sure that's the same in a number of other developing countries, is the pharmaceutical companies are much better equipped, and they're doing much better research, R&D, and much advanced work than they are doing at universities. The universities think they do a lot of things, but they don't really, because there's very little continuum. Even if you look at the research profile of all our scientists, with few exceptions, most of them seem to have graduate students come and produce papers, because the papers help them to get more money from the incentive schemes, as in Pakistan. And in Bangladesh, of course, the more publications you have, the better chance you have of promotion. So they're more worried about their promotion and getting the incentives than about a product. So it has to be two ways. The pharmaceutical companies, unfortunately, instead of getting things from the universities to work and take to a product, are mostly, what they're doing is they're importing things from outside and packaging them and selling them under the name and making a lot of money. These are the generic drugs. We call them generic drugs. And there are at least 20 of such companies in Bangladesh which are just as good as anything in the world, any company in the world. And they make huge amounts of money, but they don't do their own research. They actually bring products from outside, repackage and resell. And that's how pharmaceutical companies make their money in most of the Islamic world. So my proposal to COMSTECH and to everybody else has been that we have to really build the bridges between the pharmaceutical companies and the universities, and treat them with honor, so that they also have faith in us. Because at the moment they think that the university teachers are living in ivory towers and they don't really know what is going on in the real world. And at the same time, they are also not doing any research which is innovative, totally innovative, and mostly doing things that other people have done. And if you look at the research activities in government institutions, you find that they're mostly reinventing the wheel instead of doing innovative research. So the thing to do is to build the bridges. I call it the R&D chasm, the research and development. There's a big gap between research and development, and we have to narrow this gap. But if I bring this up even with the very highly placed people in the Islamic world and including in Pakistan, they said, oh, leave it, this is too expensive, too difficult, so we shouldn't do it. And I say, then what will we be? We'll just be sample gatherers for the West, or we'll be doing just the things that they don't want to do, or will we just continue reinventing the wheel? Because there is huge intellectual potential in our part of the world. Then why don't we use that to use the intellectual capital to build the money and the wealth for our country? Because I can just give you one example. When I was in Africa, one of my jobs was to go every year and try and meet young people who are doing research, African people who are doing young researchers from Africa working in England or Europe or America. And invariably what they used to say is that we have left the country and we're not returning, not because of the security or the money. The main reason is that we are unable to do world-class research on a project in my own country while working in my own country. And this is what we have to make for our young people, both to stop the brain drain and to bring them back to the country and retain them in the country. And there are some fantastic research organizations that are doing it. In Pakistan, I know there are quite a few now, but let's see how it goes. But I don't know that there are too many very useful partnerships between universities and research and pharmaceutical companies anywhere in the Islamic world. So one of my proposals has been to both the Islamic world, Islamic Bank, Islamic Development Bank, and to COMSTECH has been that let's find one or two projects where we can all work together. So instead of duplicating something everywhere and things that are expensive, let's develop, strengthen what is what in what country, and then we can work together. So it needs a frame shift where people have to think of working together, because everybody thinks that I'm the main person, so I should be the top. And everybody can be the top. There are ways of working together, and this is not a culture that we have, unfortunately. So this is what COMSTECH needs to do. This is what the Islamic Development Bank needs to do, is find projects where we can all work together, and then force the companies through incentives, government incentive to those companies to work with universities, and tell the universities that while we don't want to stop you from doing good research, the research must not be exclusively blue sky research, but research that leads to products and processes that help the people of our countries.
And has there been any progress so far on your proposal, sir?
No, there hasn't been, unfortunately. This is a continuing problem. When I'm back in that part of the world, there's a lot of enthusiasm. I come back, it vanishes. Now, because of family reasons, I can't go and live there. Used to spend about half my time in the developing world. I can't do it at the moment, but I'm always willing to try and help build these bridges. But I think that there has to be give and take from both sides. And the government has to play a catalytic role in making this happen. They have to provide incentives, not only to the scientists, but they also have to provide incentives to companies that provide money and resources to the basic sciences in the universities. So that on projects that can lead to a product. So it has to come very early on using the American model. The best country to follow, example to follow, is that of South Korea. They have done wonderful in this.
Professor, your research has resulted in over 130 peer-reviewed publications in international journals, many book chapters, 10 patents, over 300 conference presentations, and more than 100 invited lectures. You have received over 15 million Australian dollars in research grants. You are elected fellow of 5 different science academies and currently Secretary General of the Islamic World Academy of Sciences. Based on your vast experience, would you tell us how health can be produced through social, political, and economic processes that you were talking about earlier too? So how they are interconnected, and you have been pointing towards it. If you could.
In my case, I write in the newspapers trying to convince the policymakers that they don't only have to give lip service, but they have to actively support world-class research. Because if you take the case of Bangladesh, they do spend quite a lot of money, but most of the money goes towards infrastructure and towards salaries. It doesn't go towards research. There is no two ways about it. The countries, if they really want to prosper, the governments have to spend at least 2% of the GDP on research. And they have to spend at least 6 to 8% on higher education, including higher education. But no Islamic country is doing that. Pakistan is doing well, and it is mainly because of Professor Ataur Rahman and his colleagues and others like that. But that was a special circumstances where the president of the country and a very eminent scientist got together. This was a fortunate accident. It doesn't usually happen in our part of the world, but it must happen. I mean, if we don't spend that amount of money, and if this money is not properly coordinated, and the research is not properly coordinated, we will just be wasting taxpayers' money. So the best option still is for the government to spend the money, but force people in a way that both the universities and think that it is in their interest to work towards projects, towards products and processes. And remember that it's not only clinical and basic sciences, but also public health and social sciences that are very important in the connections. For example, if you look at the COVID-19 problem now, I think more than any vaccine or any research, I mean, I've got a group working on that too, but more than any of that, I think what's more important is public health research and social research. And we tend to forget that they need to work together, but that's something that is also not happening. The scientific community, the medical community, the social science community are working in their own silos. I don't think they interact or work together very much. So these are the weaknesses. And I sometimes feel that I'm barking up the wrong tree and tilting at windmills like Don Quixote, not getting anywhere. I'm trying my best, and hopefully I'll be able to convince people that this is the way we need to go before it's time for me to leave.
Professor, you have done a lot of research. You have vast experience, and as you said, that you are very good in creating connections and creating collaborations. So, to try to look at the reality and the emerging trends, do you see a good future, a better healthcare system, maybe a universal healthcare system now, especially after COVID-19 pandemic, that has taught us all that we are all interconnected on different levels? So, do you anticipate universal healthcare anytime in 10 years or something?
I think 10 years, I would be saying that it's very optimistic, but if we don't start now, it will take much longer than that. I think that this is a wake-up call. The COVID-19 pandemic is a wake-up call, and it's something that does not think about boundaries or gender or class of people or anything else or religion. And it is in our interest to do things which help everybody else, and we have to be cooperative. But in terms of the Islamic world, I think it's time for COMSTECH and for Islamic Development Bank to sit down and prioritize and say, we can't do everything under the sun. We are too far behind every other country, developed country. We want to be developed ourselves. And our poorer brothers in the Islamic world need the help of the people who are better, and the better ones need to work together. And for that reason, there needs to be a priority. And the priority means that we work on projects where everybody can contribute. And for that to happen, I think it must come from the government level. And if the governments don't do it, if the governments don't work with each other, I don't think there's very little chance that it'll percolate down, and the universities will do it, because there is a lot of tribalism in universities all over. And it's more important that I do research to build up my university or my career or my thing, rather than think that we all are in it together and we need to work together. So I still suggest that we need to convince our policymakers in the Islamic world that we need to work together to maximize the collaboration, try and build up the strengths in different parts, not try and repeat and replicate everything everywhere, but build up what is the strength in everywhere, and then get all the strengths together to do the sort of thing. But it's a question of mindset. And unfortunately, that mindset is very difficult to shift. So if you ask me what's the best way, I think it's a question of mindset, and the people who can change the mindset are the governments, and who going to change the government mindset? It must be the people, and that will only happen if the common people put pressure through the ballot box to make the people who run the country know that they have to look after the country. Now, one of the weaknesses is that we try and get on the bandwagon. Whatever is the bandwagon, we all want to get on it and do it. But there are things which are very strong in different parts of the world. Like, for example, we are very strong in natural product chemistry. If you look at the research being carried out in Pakistan in the ICCBS and other places, other laboratories, they're very strong. But if you look at how it's done, you'll find that the ethnobotanists, ethnobiologists are working in their silo, the medicinal chemists are working in their silo, the molecular biologists have not joined them. And it is very important that they all try and work together towards a common goal. And that's one of the projects that I'm trying to push. But I don't think that there are too many people in the Islamic Development Bank who have the ability to really judge that these are the sort of things. And there has to be a mechanism where innovative ideas and joint projects take priority over other things. But as I say, you can't do everything and be the world beater in everything. You have to look at the strengths in different places. As I said, we have an opportunity in the whole Islamic world to work in natural products chemistry, but it will only go forward if the molecular biologists and the natural product chemists and the ethnobiologists all get together and work together. And that's what I hope that I will be able to help some of my friends in both in Bangladesh and Pakistan and other countries establish once we can start moving again.
Okay, so before we move to the third segment of our program, one question that I would love to ask all the scientists, because there was a famous line by Einstein, and he said that I am an artist, I work with my imagination. So I wonder, what do you think is the role of imagination in your scientific endeavors?
I think it's very important. The problem is that we have so little money and to hand around that we put all our eggs in one basket. We tell people to go after projects which will produce products. And I had said that that is important, so I'm contradicting myself again. But what I have done in my own lab and my own groups is said to people that you work on these common projects for 4 days in a week. And on the 5th day, you have free to do whatever you like to do, as long as it's around the same area. But you use your imagination, what would you do? And believe me, that has led to more publications and ideas than anything else. So while it is important to work on common projects, you have to also give people the opportunity to think hard, think about how they would do things differently or things that would interest them more. And that freedom, unfortunately, doesn't exist very much. It all depends on whatever the head of the lab or the professor in the lab tells you to do. And young people need to be given the opportunity to also have some time to think about what they would like to do, which they think could improve what they're doing or even start new areas. And it is imagination that will also allow these spin-off companies to come off. That's happened in America and happens in other countries. And we have to be careful that we do it. I mean, one of the other things I find very encouraging in Pakistan is the number of female scientists, young scientists, who come up, who do so well in the universities. But unfortunately, so many of them don't exist in science after a few years. And we can't lose half our scientific manpower. We go to a lot of trouble and money and spend a lot of money training them, but then once they get married and there's so many pressures on them that we lose them. So we have to find ways of keeping them. We have to find ways of keeping young people back in the country rather than going abroad and not coming back. And they don't come back because unlike Pakistan is a little different in most countries other than Pakistan, Malaysia, and Turkey, and Iran. In most of the countries, they have very little opportunities of doing world-class research in the Islamic world. So we have to have the opportunity and make the opportunities where we can have brain circulation, which means that even if they go to another country, it's to another developing country in the Islamic world. So they go to another place which has got the expertise that is not in the country or the equipment that is not in the country, and they all exchange minds. And this way, we can actually save money. And because I think one of the things that India did best, and South America, South Korea and others have done best, and it's happened in Pakistan, is the science has really taken off after they stopped the young people going for PhDs abroad. So we have to have a very strong PhD programs in our countries. It is moderately well in Pakistan, but in most countries, people still prefer to do the PhD overseas. The problem is that when you go overseas and you work with very sophisticated equipment and you do projects which have nothing to do with your country. When you come back, you are frustrated because you want to do that work in your own country and you don't have the equipment, you don't have the projects. And so I've always advised that we should convert everything into a sandwich program. We either should stop people from doing PhDs overseas and make them do PhDs in their countries and then go for postdocs overseas if necessary, or have a sandwich program where they do part of the work in their countries of origin, go to a more advanced country to access the expertise and facilities, and then come back and develop that field in their own countries. The good thing is that if they do go to other developing countries, then it is much easier for them to find research which is applicable. Because if they go overseas and do extremely good research, publish in Nature and Science, they make a name for themselves. And even if they come back, they don't stay very long. So we have to really think about these things.
Thank you, Professor Azad. And this brings us to our third segment, which is geared towards OIC goals and how your research has contributed to it. And OIC goals include a wide variety of issues, ranging from peace and security to combating climate change, overcoming sustainable development challenges, alleviating poverty, and overcoming diseases and health problems. Professor Azad, can you please share the applications of your scientific contributions in fulfilling these goals? I know you have contributed a great deal, so if you could just pick up a few of them that you want to share with us.
I don't know where to start. I've made presentations at COMSTECH in Pakistan on these issues. And I've written to COMSTECH, I've written to Islamic Development Bank, but I don't think people listen very much because they go and think, oh, okay, if I give $1 million to this project, or if I give $100,000 to 5 projects, that is my duty. But I think that there has to be an understanding, as I said before, that we have to think of projects which are common to different countries in the Islamic world, in the OIC. And we have to then say that we cannot do 100 different things. Let's have a number of priorities, have a dozen or 2 dozen priorities in areas which are of most importance, like conservation and climate change, like food security, like health security. These are important, and in the area of health equity. Let's say these are the important areas. So let's go and have have a brainstorming session with the main people in here, and then come up and say, these are the projects that have the most chance of succeeding if we combine our resources, if we combine our intellectual capacity. And these are the projects that will help the poorer countries in the Islamic world, and can come down on the number of projects and do a few things, but do them at world standard. There's no use dropping a little bit of money here and bit of money there, and giving consolation to your conscience. You really have to think about in terms of, can we make the most of it? How do we do it? How do we make the universities and the companies work together on common goals? All right, the companies want to make profits, so let them make the profit. But let's give them incentives so that besides profit, they can also save or get the medical incentive if they work on these projects, that wonderful projects that have been proposed at universities. And these are the sort of thinking we have to do. We have to prioritize, and we have to do a few things, but do them at a really standard way. We got the same sort of money that other people do. I'll just give you an example. There's one gentleman called Ubaid Siddiqui in India, and he's one of the foremost biologists in the world. He died, I think, recently. and is a very learned man and fellow of the Royal Society and everything. And many years back, Indira Gandhi told him, uh, they were at the same age and knew each other. So I told him, Ubaid, you go overseas and find 6 scientists, the best 6 scientists you can find in this area, biological science, bring them back to India, and we'll get them whatever they're getting at Harvard or Cambridge or whatever they are. And that's what he did. He set up the NCBS, National Center for Biological Sciences in Bangalore, and they have built from 6 to a larger number, and they do real world-class research there. Professor Ataur Rahman did a similar thing, but in this case, it was mostly money, but my feeling has been that this could have gone even better than it has because there was a lot of bureaucracy. See, that bureaucracy is also another problem, especially in my country, Bangladesh, because only the people the government wants to punish, they send to the Ministry of Science and Technology. They send the best diplomats, their best public servants to ministries of finance and planning rather than to science departments. Whereas in India, it's quite different. They have different clusters. So public servants remain in the clusters. So if you're talking to public servant across the thing, the public servant probably knows just as much as university professor, the vice chancellor. And because their secretaries in the science-oriented departments come from universities, they're not career diplomats. And in my country, Bangladesh, it's just the opposite. If you want to punish someone, you send them to the Ministry of Science and Technology. I think that South Korea is a model where they have really, really done well. And they have the per capita, the highest number of patents per capita. And they have used the patents very wisely to build the connections between the universities. And now they leapfrogged countries like China to become a developed country in 2012, before China, just because they were spending the 20% of their education, of their whole budget on education, and they were spending about 2 to 4% on research. But the research was very goal-oriented. Okay, they started off in the areas of automobiles and electronics, but today they are world leaders in biotechnology also. So we can learn from others, and there are lots of very good things going on in the Islamic world. The main thing to do is to see how do we get everybody to work together, because everybody will say, yeah, it's a very good idea, let's do that. But when the time comes for money or for a joint venture, you don't find anybody.
So what is the solution, sir? In fact, that was my next question: how to increase collaboration and cooperation among
I have given up.
OIC?
I mean, after 20 years of trying, I think I really don't know. As I said to you, the only way is to change the mindset of our policymakers. You have an advantage in Pakistan that you have a few people like that, Ataur Rahman, and there are a few others. But it has to happen all over. I think that's the only way it will change, unless the policymakers think that science is very important. Science will never be important. They have to believe and support science, and you have to spend the money. You just can't. This is not cheap. Neither research nor education, higher education is cheap. You have to spend the money. You don't spend the money, you're not going to get anywhere. But spending the money is not the solution alone. The money has to be spent if you have a proper plan. And if you don't have a proper plan, you'll just throw bits of water in the sand.
And so far, what has been COMSTECH's or OIC's progress in creating a network among scientists, bringing them together? What has happened so far?
I think the COMSTECH is also constrained by money. I think, to tell the truth, the money comes mostly from Pakistan. So COMSTECH has to is sitting in a position where they have an interministerial meeting of science ministers, and that's where the change has to occur. The people have to talk freely and convince that group, and then COMSTECH has to work together with the Islamic Development Bank. The Islamic Development Bank has its own agenda, and even in the area of research, they do go out a few fellowships, as does COMSTECH. But these just handing out a few fellowships or a few scholarships is not enough. They have to really have a major plan of how they're going to make this work together. I mean, look at the problem you had in Germany after the war, but they had a Marshall Plan, which really rebuilt the country. And that plan, one of the foremost things was they relied on science and education to rebuild the country. Same thing happened in South Korea in 1950. In the early 70s, the situation in South Korea was the same as what was in Pakistan. But today, look where South Korea has gone, because they decided that they are going to use education and science to build the country, to make the country a developed country. And they were determined to do it, and they did it. This is the sort of determination that we need, within our policymakers and institutions like COMSTECH and Islamic Development Bank and the Islamic World Academy of Sciences and the Pakistan Academy of Sciences and the Academy of Sciences of different Islamic countries. That there needs to we talk about it incessantly. We talk about it at the IAS meetings, but this needs to be a major agenda at the interministerial meeting of COMSTECH.
And you also mentioned earlier that we need funds, and of course we do need funds, and it is expensive to do science. What kind of funds are we talking about, sir? When you go to Islamic Bank, what kind of funds that you ask them
Islamic
for?
Bank just pays lip service to science, with all due respect. They pick up one or two and just feel very happy that they have helped one or two. This is now how it's going to work. I think COMSTECH has a huge role in sitting down with them and say, let's set aside this amount of money. Let every Islamic country decide that they will give 1 to 2% of their money, of the national budget, of the GDP to science, convince them, and you fund it. Whatever comes together, the Islamic Development Bank puts together, and then we try and fund the major projects that we need to conquer. For example, making a vaccine against COVID-19 is not a huge problem. I have done research like that, and there are other people who have done research like that. But if you wanted to do it, who's going to provide the money to do it? And even if it did succeeded in making the money, where would the money come from for the clinical testing, for the clinical trials? Because that is a huge amount of money. Who's going to give the money? The companies in the Western countries, they provide the money, and they have provided me money to do clinical things. But the companies, pharmaceutical companies in our countries are not going to give the money unless they've provided the incentives that if they give money and they make a profit, and if they give money to basic research, the government will recompensate them by through tax deductions or whatever. Similarly, in Pakistan, for example, they have got a very good incentive for researchers, that if the research productivity equates into they're getting more money for themselves. But it's become a very sorry to say this, but it's a very good system where you can be on everybody's paper, and everybody can be on everybody's paper, and you can end up having a lot of adding up your what do you call uh, uh, the citations, and you can increase your journal impact factors, because without distinguishing between the first and last authors and the people in between. So if you decide that you're going to be on every paper, everybody's going to be on every paper, you can add up and get a huge amount of thing and get money for that. But I think that's not the way to do it. Scientists must be incentivized, they must be given money, and the similarly thing. But I think that you have to look at the better ways of giving money, of rewarding people. I think it would be much better in a country like Pakistan to give the real productive researchers real money instead of giving them tamghas every year. Sorry to say that.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for sharing your thoughts and your achievements and your projects that you have done. Your advice is very important. I hope that COMSTECH and OIC would also listen into it. And I understand that doing science is requires a lot of money. And as you pointed out, Islamic Bank has a role to play, but so does the governments. And governments, if they decide to put in some money, maybe then we'll be able to create a program where we prioritize the areas we want to work on. But then there is something which we can provide even if we don't have the money, that is to create a network that COMSTECH is trying to do or the OIC is trying to do. And with that, you get to know as a scientist working in biochemistry, who else is working on this field in OIC country. And maybe, as you said, that we can work together instead of reinventing the wheel. We can build upon each other's work and create a solution. So I really appreciate Professor Dr. Azad. It was an honor talking to you, sir. And thank you so much for your work and service to humanity.
Yeah,
thank you, sir.
Most welcome. The only thing I would like to say is that I'm sorry that some of the people might be offended by my being so honest, but I have to be honest. I mean, I haven't got much time left. So I hope they will listen and take it in the same spirit that I have given. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate you guys joining in. Today, we spoke to a brilliant scientist of OIC member state, and we listened to his advice and his work. I hope that we will try to take note of it. And next time, we'll meet again in a next episode with another illustrious scientist from an OIC member state. Thank you very much.